Imagine walking outside your house tomorrow, and instead of seeing only other Homo sapiens, you see a Neanderthal buying bread. Then across the street, a tiny Homo floresiensis is waiting for a bus. And somewhere in the forest, a Denisovan is just minding his own business. Sounds like a very confusing Monday morning. But believe it or not, there was a time when Earth was not occupied by just one kind of human. We weren't alone. For hundreds of thousands of years, different human species lived on the same planet, and some of them were incredibly successful. Some survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Some were stronger than us. Some were excellent hunters. Some had surprisingly advanced tools, and some even had bigger brains than ours. Yet today, they're all gone, except us. So what happened? Why are we the only humans left? And perhaps the strangest question of all, did we defeat them, replace them, or did some of them become part of us? Let's go back, way back, because the human family tree is much more crowded than you probably think. About 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared in Africa, but we weren't the only members of the human family walking around. There were other Homo species scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia. There were Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi, Homo heidelbergensis, and several others. Scientists have identified more than a dozen species of early humans from fossils and other evidence. So picture Earth tens of thousands of years ago. Instead of one human species dominating the planet, humanity was a whole neighborhood. And then, one by one, the neighbors disappeared. First, the Neanderthals. If ancient humans had a celebrity, Neanderthals would probably be one of the biggest. They lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. And forget the old cartoon version of the Neanderthal dragging a club around while making confused noises. Neanderthals were much more sophisticated than that. They controlled fire, they made tools, they hunted, they wore clothing, they lived in shelters, they sometimes buried their dead, and their brains were at least comparable in size to ours, and sometimes larger. These weren't stupid cavemen, they were humans. Different from us, yes, but surprisingly capable. And here's where things get interesting. Around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began expanding into Europe. And guess who was already there? Yep, the Neanderthals.
Now, imagine two human species suddenly competing for the same territory, food, and resources. It wasn't necessarily some giant prehistoric war where Homo sapiens marched into Europe shouting, "Everybody out!" There is no evidence of one massive war that wiped out the Neanderthals. The reality was probably much messier. Climate was changing, food sources were changing, animal populations were changing, and Neanderthals may have been particularly vulnerable because they relied heavily on large Ice Age animals. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens had some advantages. We could cooperate across larger networks, we used a wide variety of foods, we developed increasingly sophisticated technologies, and we could adapt to different environments. The Smithsonian notes that competition, environmental change, and differences in technology and diet may all have contributed to Neanderthal disappearance. And eventually, the Neanderthals disappeared. By around 40,000 years ago, they were gone. But here's the plot twist. They didn't completely disappear from us, because our ancestors met them and had children with them. Today, many people whose ancestors traces outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. So in a weird evolutionary sense, the Neanderthals aren't completely gone. A little bit of them is still walking around. You, me, your neighbor who takes 3 hours to reply to a message, possibly carrying prehistoric family history. Then there were the Denisovans. The Denisovans are even stranger. We know they existed largely because of DNA and a very small number of fossil remains. Scientists have found Denisovan remains including a finger bone, teeth, and a jawbone. That's it. Imagine reconstructing your entire family history from one finger and 2 teeth. Good luck. Yet their DNA tells us something fascinating. Denisovans were closely related to Neanderthals and also interacted with Homo sapiens. And again, they interbred with us.
Some genes inherited from Denisovans are still present in modern human populations. One particularly famous example involves a genetic adaptation that helps people living at very high altitudes, such as Tibetan populations, cope with low oxygen environments. So again, another human group disappeared, but pieces of them survived inside another human population, us. But what about the other humans? And this is where things become even more bizarre. Take Homo floresiensis. Scientists nicknamed them the hobbits. Why? Because they were extremely small. An adult Homo floresiensis may have stood only around 1 meter tall. But don't let the height fool you. These tiny humans survived on the Indonesian island of Flores for a very long time. Then there's Homo luzonensis, discovered in the Philippines. There's Homo naledi in South Africa. There's Homo erectus, one of the great travelers of human history, surviving for an astonishingly long period. And then there were other populations that we probably haven't even discovered yet. Think about that. Every fossil we discover is basically a tiny piece of a gigantic puzzle, and we're still missing most of the pieces. So why did they all disappear? Here's the frustrating answer. Scientists don't have one single explanation, and honestly, that's probably because there wasn't one. Extinction is rarely as simple as something killed them. Instead, imagine several problems arriving at the same time. Climate changes, food becomes harder to find, populations become smaller, disease appears, competitors move into the area, resources become scarce, and suddenly, a species that survived for hundreds of thousands of years becomes extremely vulnerable. For some human species, geography may have played a role. Imagine living on an island. If your population becomes too small, there aren't many people left to reproduce with. A few bad years, a changing climate, a shortage of food, and suddenly your entire population is in trouble. For others, competition may have mattered. And then there was Homo sapiens. We were ridiculously good at spreading. We moved, we adapted, we invented, we cooperated, we communicated, and most importantly, we didn't just adapt individually, we adapted culturally. If the environment changed, we could invent something. If one food disappeared, we could search for another. If temperatures dropped, we could make better clothing. If prey became difficult to catch, we could develop better hunting strategies. Our survival wasn't just written into our bodies, it was stored in our knowledge. And knowledge could be passed from one generation to another. That's an enormous advantage. Some people still argue that we eliminated other human species. This is where we need to be careful. It's tempting to imagine Homo sapiens as prehistoric villains who simply eliminated everyone else. But the evidence doesn't allow us to say that. We don't know exactly how every extinct human species disappeared. And there's another reason we shouldn't oversimplify it. We didn't just compete with these humans, we also mixed with them. Our ancestors had children with Neanderthals. They had children with Denisovans. So the story wasn't simply, they disappeared. In some cases, it was more like their populations disappeared, but parts of them became incorporated into ours. That's a very different story. So why are we the last ones? The most likely answer is not that Homo sapiens was simply the strongest. It was probably a combination of things. Our ability to adapt, our ability to cooperate, our technology, our wide-ranging diets, our ability to move into new environments, our huge social networks, and our ability to accumulate knowledge across generations. Think about it. One human discovers something useful. He teaches 10 people. Those 10 teach their children. Their children improve it. Then another group adds something new. Thousands of years later, you have airplanes, smartphones, satellites, and people arguing with strangers online about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. That's the ridiculous power of cumulative culture. Information doesn't have to die when the individual dies. It can survive and improve and spread. That may have been one of the greatest advantages Homo sapiens ever developed. We weren't necessarily destined to win. For most of human history, we were just another human species. There was nothing about the universe that said Homo sapiens had to survive. Our species has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Some other human species existed for much longer. Homo erectus, for example, survived for an extraordinarily long stretch of time. So being successful for a long time doesn't guarantee survival.
And today, we are the last human species standing. But that doesn't mean the others left nothing behind. Their fossils are in museums, their tools are buried underground, their DNA is inside some of us, their genes may influence how our bodies respond to disease, climate, and altitude. Their existence has shaped our understanding of what it means to be human. And perhaps the most humbling lesson is this: we are not the first humans to walk this planet. We're just the ones who made it to the present. For most of our history, there were other humans. They hunted, they raised children, they struggled with cold, they searched for food, they made tools. They probably laughed, they probably argued, they loved their families, they stared at the stars. And eventually, they vanished, leaving behind tiny fragments of their existence for us to discover thousands of generations later. So the next time someone calls another person a different kind of human, remember, there actually were different kinds of humans, and somehow you are living at the exact point of history where only one remains. Homo sapiens, the last human species. Well, for now. Because here's the uncomfortable question. If climate change, disease, competition, and environmental disasters helped eliminate other human species, what makes us so certain that we are different? Maybe the real mystery isn't why did the other humans disappear? Maybe it's how long can a last human species survive before another replaces us? And that is a story for another video.